Things come at a time of increasing attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. According to the group Stop AAPI Hate, there have been 3,800 hate incidents recorded since the beginning of the pandemic.
Asian Americans were discriminated against from the very beginning of their arrival in the United States. Many people of Asian descent settled in California during the gold rush to try to strike it rich. When they didn't like most people, they took on labor jobs and were treated poorly by the residents of wherever they were. Many Asian Americans settled into communities with other Asian Americans. These towns became known as Chinatowns. During the late 1800s, Asian Americans were treated similarly to African Americans, except they were paid almost nothing to do manual labor for people. Asian Americans were banned from buying land and often called aliens and other names, anything other than Asian Americans. Some of the worst of the discrimination happened in December 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. People would attack anyone of Asian descent, even if they'd been in the United States for 3 generations. Houses were burnt down, people were assaulted, and lives were changed forever when President Roosevelt made a huge decision on February 19th, 1942.
During the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt, he implemented Executive Order 9066, the policy that required people of Japanese descent to be incarcerated in isolated camps. With American history of constantly being paranoid and acting irrationally during times of war, these internment camps are a perfect example. The times of war should be no excuse for the actions America had taken, as Japanese people were highly discriminated against during this era. For example, the conditions were so bad the government staged photos of the internment camps to make their lives look better than it truly was. Here's a photo of what the government showed, and here's a photo of what life was really like under these internment camps. People were being split from families and friends, like Fred Korematsu. He refused to be taken away from his wife, so to hide himself, he underwent plastic surgery on his eyes and changed his name to Clyde Sarah to avoid the camps. In addition, during this era, many Asian American business owners had their places damaged and ruined. Plus, their homes would be riddled with hate comments. The saddest part is discrimination, just like this, hate comments and destroying business owned from Asian Americans still have happened in our very recent history.
So, what were historic events that happened to combat this discrimination? It wasn't until the 1960s and 70s that diverse communities with different histories began to self consciously unite as Asian Americans. In the 1950s, successful campaigns against bills that would have made interracial marriage illegal in Washington state brought Japanese, Chinese, and Filipino activists together, though Filipino activists took the lead. Later in the 1960s, the Jackson Street Community Council brought community leaders from Seattle's Asian and African communities together to advocate for neighborhood improvement issues, which frequently included important Civil Rights Act advocacy. And in the early 1960s, City Council member Wing Luke and Human Rights Commission Chairman Phil Hayasaka helped connect Asian American communities to the struggle for open housing in Seattle.
Even today, Asian Americans face a lot of unnecessary hate in America. This was shown very recently amid the COVID-19 outbreak. People blamed Asian Americans for the virus, calling it the Chinese virus. Even former President Donald Trump took part in these acts, calling COVID the Kung flu, which caused a surge in Asian hate. In an era where social media has taken over, the spread of hate and discrimination has become far worse than it ever has been in the past, to a point where even Asian American kids in schools have been bullied not only at school but online as well. 2 months after the start of COVID, 60% of Asian Americans have reported being a witness to someone blaming people of Asian background for the pandemic. Although there's been much hate, there have been many people in support of Asian Americans holding rallies across the country in efforts to stop Asian hate.